So recently, there's been a lot of hype surrounding Alex Pereira, with him being thought of as one of the best strikers in the UFC. And honestly, I kind of believe the same. I mean, he's the former Glory Kickboxing light heavyweight and middleweight champion, with 8 knockouts. He also has an impressive 3-1 head-to-head record over former UFC middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya, and a win over current middleweight champion, Sean Strickland. And after a successful move to the light heavyweight division, and win over former champion Jan Blachowicz at UFC 291, it set him up perfectly for a title fight with another former champion, Yuri Prochazka, which will be going down at UFC 295. Yuri is coming off of a shoulder injury that forced him to vacate the title in late 2022. But the other fighter I want to talk about today is not Yuri Prochazka. And for that, I want to rewind a few weeks when we had another certain UFC light heavyweight champion that also got injured and vacated his title. Jamahal Hill became UFC champion at UFC 283, where he put on an absolute clinic on Glover Teixeira, scoring a 50-44 unanimous decision across all judges' scorecards. And shortly after the fight, there was speculation of then middleweight champion Alex Pereira moving up to the light heavyweight division and challenging for the title. Now this made sense when you consider the relationship both Alex and Glover have. For Alex, it would have been a really cool story arc where he could have gotten the chance to avenge his mentor against the person that put him into retirement. But if this fight had happened, who would have really came out on top? In this video, we'll go over their attributes and fight data to try to tell a story on how this fight could have played out. So let's start off with the general overview. Both fighters are 6'4" inches tall and have a 79-inch reach. Alex is an orthodox fighter, whereas Jamahal is a southpaw fighter. In their pro MMA careers, Alex has 6 knockouts with an 8-2 record, and Jamahal has 7 knockouts with a 12-1 record. Jamahal technically has 8 knockouts, but 1 got overturned against Klidson and Bravo for testing positive for marijuana. So in terms of career and physical attributes, they're fairly matched. So for the specifics of each fighter, Alex Pereira has a significant strike accuracy of 62%, whereas Jamahal Hill has a significant strike accuracy of 54%. Pereira has a significant strike defense of 51%, and Hill has a strike defense of around 47%. Pereira absorbs an average of 3.7 strikes per minute, and Hill 3.35 strikes per minute. Hill lands at an average of 7.31 strikes per minute, whereas Pereira lands at an average of 5.11 strikes per minute. So on paper, they both seem pretty similar, with Pereira landing at a more accurate rate despite lower output, and Hill landing at a less accurate rate with higher output. But diving deeper into these numbers, we see something a little more interesting. If you expand the strike accuracy stats to show the targets of each fighter, both land their strikes at a fairly similar rate to the head, body, and legs, as seen in these bar charts. Expanding these numbers further to just see their main targets in their fights, you see the main differences. In the UFC, Alex Pereira is mostly known as a distance striker that likes to attack from all places, whether that be to the leg, body, and head. And as so, the significant strike distribution of Alex Pereira reflects that. To illustrate this, I created a pie chart which shows the distribution of strikes that landed from Alex Pereira. As you can see from the chart, Pereira will mainly attempt to strike to the head at a rate of 41%, but also utilizes his kicks and strikes to the body, with 35% of his strikes going to the body and 24% of them to the leg. And if you remove the Bruno Silva fight, then we see Alex's significant strike targets are almost exactly evenly distributed. I'll get back to why I removed the Bruno Silva fight in a bit. When we look at the strike distribution of Jamahal Hill, we see something completely different. In contrast to Alex Pereira, Jamahal Hill lands over 2/3 of his significant strikes to the head, and the rest are divided by body and leg. Now, even though 1/3 of the time Hill will go to the body and legs, his main objective is to knock the opponent's lights out. So given their strike accuracies and strike composition, and observing just the way they both fight, you can tell a bit of a story. You can assume that Alex Pereira will try and keep his distance to attack Jamahal Hill at all parts of the body, whether that be through leg kicks, body shots, and of course his left hooks, while Jamahal Hill will try and find any opportunity to knock out Pereira through volume head strikes and power punches. Now actually, that would have been a safe assumption had Pereira's strike distribution that I showed earlier had mainly been against southpaw fighters. And this is why now I want to revisit the Bruno Silva fight. Bruno Silva was the only true southpaw that Pereira has ever fought in his UFC career. And if you go back and rewatch it, it was actually a pretty competitive fight. But one thing that really stuck out about that fight that was very different than the others is that one of Alex's main tools, the outside leg kick, was mitigated due to the stance switch. Because of that stance switch, Alex had to throw switch kicks to attack the outside of the lead leg. This is something that takes longer to do, and also something he doesn't do often in his fights. And Silva's frequent counters off of them in the first round of their fight made Pereira almost completely stop throwing them in the second and third round, and start letting his hands go throughout the fight. In this fight, we saw him get clipped multiple times by Silva's counters and strikes, but also saw him go for his own ruthless barrages. If you look at the strike distribution of Pereira for this fight, it's very different than any of his others. From the strike distribution pie chart for this fight, we can see that Pereira only landed 6% of his strikes to the leg, and the remaining 94% of them were to the head and body. If we compare this to Jamahal Hill's strike distribution for all of his fights, this strike distribution actually seems closer to what we see from Hill all the time. So with the data, and given that Jamahal Hill is predominantly a southpaw fighter, we can see how this can make an entertaining fight because we can probably expect an aggressive boxing showcase from one or both of these guys. But in order to draw a clearer conclusion on who would get the better of these striking exchanges, I think it's important we analyze their striking defense, in particular to the head, since the leg kicks would be severely impacted by the stance switch. For this, I made these bar charts to analyze the striking defense percentage per target for both of them, with a slight caveat. For this chart, I removed the Jamahal Hill-Paul Craig fight, because 17 of those 18 strikes to the head were on the ground after Craig got the triangle. For Alex Pereira, I removed the first round of the Jan Blachowicz fight, and the third round of the Israel Adesanya 1 fight for similar reasons. In the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really make too much of a difference. So even though technically their significant strike defense to the head is similar with 61% and 65% for Alex and Jamahal respectively, by expanding these numbers, it actually shows that Pereira took more strikes to the head in his UFC career than Jamahal. And this is despite the fact that Jamahal has more UFC fights and around 4.5 more minutes in the cage than Pereira. Now you can make the case that Jamahal Hill's strike defense being better is because he's fought slower opponents than Alex Pereira, given he's in a heavier weight class. But when you're fighting the likes of Thiago Santos, Jimmy Crute, and of course Johnny Walker, it's hard to make that case against Hill. And also considering Alex Pereira's first fight at light heavyweight against Jan Blachowicz saw him get clipped more accurately to the head than anyone in his UFC career at middleweight, you can see that this doesn't hold too much merit for strike defense. So ultimately, how do I think this fight would go? I think the fight will start and remain standing. Pereira might throw a leg kick or two to capitalize on Jamahal Hill's bad leg kick defense. Jamahal Hill will attempt counters off of those leg kicks, and one of them will land, which will make Pereira think twice about throwing another leg kick. And after that, Pereira will try to keep Hill at a distance with his range, and it will work to some extent at the beginning. But considering they both have similar physical attributes, this won't work for long, and Jamahal will land a counter of some sort. The fight will start closing the distance, and then they'll go into a slugfest, similar to some of Hill's fights and Pereira's war with Bruno Silva, except this time I don't think the fight will go the distance at all. And as for what I would favor in these exchanges, I think that Jamahal Hill will eventually get the better of Alex Pereira, given he has better strike defense and higher strike output to the head. It would also be the biggest opponent Alex Pereira has ever faced in the UFC, and given how we saw Pereira against Blachowicz, it could prove too much for him. I can see Jamahal Hill landing a counter, similar to his fight with Johnny Walker, or eventually finishing Pereira with a barrage of strikes. So ultimately, I will go with Jamahal Hill winning the fight. All in all though, this has all the ingredients to make a very exciting fight, and I really wish this happens in the future if Pereira gains the title and Jamahal is fully healed, as these guys are some of my favorite strikers in the UFC right now. But I want to know what you guys think. Do you think Jamahal Hill can get the better of Alex Pereira, or do you think Alex Pereira's striking is in a league of its own? I'd love to hear your guys' opinions in the comment section below, and if you like this sort of data analysis content, please consider subscribing, liking the video, and drop a comment down below for topics on the next one. So one quick note before I go, there is some unused data that I couldn't fit correctly in the video, so if you're interested in that data, it'll all be available on the Instagram page. Thanks guys.